Emmerdale's bear-wolf might have sealed Moira Dingle's fate with a slip of the tongue after admitting to killing villain Ray Walters in new police interrogation scenes. Back in January, Bear killed Ray after stepping in when the baddie threatened his son, Paddy Dingle, and teen Dylan Penders. In a recent episode, a guilt-ridden Bear turned himself in, revealing he'd murdered Ray in self-defense. Interrogated by D.S. Walsh in tonight's episode, Bear insisted he'd acted alone, concealing Paddy's involvement in helping him move Ray's body. Accompanied by his counsellor, Lucy Haynes, and his solicitor, Bear said, "It were me. I did it." D.S. Walsh quizzed him about the reason why he'd kill Ray, with Bear replying that he wanted Ray to stop, and that he couldn't remember what went down exactly, cause they were shouting. "I didn't meant to do it," he said. "I thought he were my friend." But D.S. Walsh made it clear she knew the former wrestler couldn't have moved Ray's body alone in his current health state. Bear reacted angrily, saying he had a slip of the tongue, and that he moved the body on his own, stealing the keys of Dylan's van. But D.S. Walsh continued to push Bear and asked if Paddy or Dylan had helped him. As Bear wouldn't talk, the detective asked about Moira's involvement in Anya Barisha and Celia Daniels' deaths instead. Moira had naught to do with it. "She weren't even there," Bear said of Anya's death, explaining she passed away after an illness while she was being held captive at the farm. Bear's version could have helped clear Moira's name and put D.S. Walsh on the right track to find out that the farmer had been framed by Joe Tate. However, Bear let it slip that he'd talked to Kane, saying Moira's husband had asked him to talk to the police. D.S. Walsh immediately grew suspicious of Bear's story, thinking that Kane had pressured him to take the fall for Moira. When Bear reiterated that Moira was innocent, D.S. Walsh wouldn't buy it. The detective urged him to name his accomplice, hypothesizing that Moira could have helped him move Ray's body. Visiting Moira in prison, an evasive Kane told her about Bear's confession, saying that her solicitors seemed hopeful. Meanwhile, he continued hiding the full details of his cancer diagnosis from his wife, attempting to keep her mind off his condition and redirect her focus towards the possibility of walking free. "Who knows? Maybe I'll be out sooner than you think," Moira said with a smile, unaware that Bear may have made things worse. In the final scenes, Paddy returned home with Marlon, only to find the police there. The vet was informed that his house was being searched and treated as a crime scene after Bear's confession. Bear could well be sent down for this. Our Emmerdale source revealed previously about what lies ahead for Paddy's dad. Now he's been charged with manslaughter. The odds are stacked against him. Bear's solicitor reminds Paddy that his dad acted in self-defense, so he might get bail. But all hope vanishes when Bear admits that he's set on entering a guilty plea. Back in January, frost had coated the cobbles of the village. The air had been sharp enough to sting lungs. Ray Walters had arrived at the house with menace in his smile. Ray had always carried himself like a man untouchable. He thrived on fear, and that night, he'd aimed it squarely at Paddy Dingle and Dylan Penders. Bear remembered shouting. He remembered Ray's taunts. He remembered Red. What he didn't remember, or claimed not to, was the exact moment it tipped from confrontation into fatal violence. "I wanted him to stop," Bear told D.S. Walsh now. "That's all. To stop. And killing him was the only way?" she asked coolly. Bear's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean to do it." He'd thought Ray was his friend once. That betrayal cut deepest. But when Ray lunged, when Dylan froze, when Paddy tried to shield the teenager, Bear moved. And Ray fell. The body. The memory fractured there. In truth, Bear remembered more than he let on. He remembered Paddy's horrified face. He remembered the sickening weight of Ray's body. He remembered the panic. "Did you move the body alone?" D.S. Walsh asked, flipping a page. "Aye. In your current state of health?" Bear stiffened. His breathing grew heavier. "I managed." The detective's eyebrow arched. Medical reports suggested Bear's mobility had declined significantly in recent months. Moving a fully grown man alone? Unlikely. "You had help," Walsh said. Bear slammed a palm on the table. "I had a slip of the tongue before. I moved him. On my own. Took the keys from Dylan's van." The lie sat clumsily in the room. Behind him, his solicitor shifted. What he wouldn't say. Walsh leaned forward. "Did Paddy Dingle help you?" Silence. "Did Dylan Penders?" Bear stared at the table. He wouldn't give them names. He wouldn't drag his son or that frightened boy into this. So Walsh changed tack. "And what about Moira Dingle?" Bear's head snapped up. Moira had naught to do with it. His voice was immediate. Fierce. "She weren't even there." Walsh studied him carefully. "What about Anya Barisha?" She pressed. "Or Celia Daniels?" Bear swallowed. "Anya were ill. She passed away there at that farm. Moira didn't do that. The words, if believed, could have shifted the trajectory of Moira's case entirely. She'd been accused in the wake of the modern slavery scandal. Suspicion clinging to her because of proximity, because of land ownership, because someone needed a scapegoat. Bear's testimony might have cracked that narrative. But then, he asked me to talk, Bear muttered. Walsh froze. Who? Bear's brow furrowed, realizing too late. Kane. The room shifted. Walsh's suspicion sharpened instantly. So Kane Dingle told you to take responsibility? No, Bear barked. He asked me to tell the truth. But the damage was done. To Walsh, it sounded like pressure. Manipulation. A grieving husband coercing a vulnerable man to protect his wife. Prison walls and half-truths. Later that afternoon, Kane sat opposite Moira in prison. Her hands rested against the glass between them. Well? She asked, searching his face. Bear's confessed, Kane said carefully. Your solicitor thinks it could help. He didn't mention Walsh's reaction. He didn't mention the suspicion now circling him. And he definitely didn't mention the dull ache in his side. The diagnosis he'd kept hidden. Cancer. The word echoed in his head constantly. But Moira had enough to carry. You see? She smiled faintly. Maybe I'll be out sooner than you think. Kane forced a smile. Yeah, maybe. He swallowed the guilt. Paddy's nightmare. Back at home, Paddy Dingle opened his front door to flashing blue lights. 2 officers stood waiting. What's going on? He asked, panic rising instantly. We're searching the property, one replied. It's now a crime scene. Marlon stood behind Paddy, stunned. Because of Bear? Paddy whispered. The officer didn't answer directly. But the implication was clear. Bear's confession had opened doors the police were only too eager to walk through. The slip that changed everything. In the interrogation room, Walsh replayed Bear's statement. Kane had asked him to talk. That line stuck. She'd seen it before. Family members trying to control narratives. Protect loved ones. Shift blame. Moira's repeated insistence of innocence now looked rehearsed. And Bear's loyalty looked suspiciously convenient. Walsh drafted a note. Kane Dingle. Possible witness intimidation. The ripple effect had begun. Bear's breaking point. In his holding cell, Bear sat alone. He'd meant to protect. Instead, he might have doomed them all. Lucy Haynes knelt in front of him during visiting hours. You did the right thing by coming forward, she said gently. Did I? He muttered. He thought of Paddy. Of Dylan. Of Moira smiling in that visiting room. If his slip of the tongue kept her locked up longer, the guilt would crush him. Kane under scrutiny. The next morning, Kane noticed the police car parked near the garage. DS Walsh stepped out. We need a word. Matty Barton watched nervously from inside. Kane folded his arms. What now? You've been speaking to Bear about his statement. I told him to tell the truth. And you didn't pressure him? Kane's eyes flashed. If I were pressuring someone, you'd know about it. Walsh didn't flinch. Stay out of it, Mr. Dingle. If we find evidence you've interfered, we'll act accordingly. For the first time, Kane felt the ground shift beneath him. He'd thought he was helping. Now he might be another suspect. A guilty plea. Bear's solicitor met Paddy privately. Your father acted in self-defense, she explained. We'll argue that. He could get bail. Paddy clung to that. But hope evaporated when Bear made his decision. I'm pleading guilty. Paddy stared at him in disbelief. Dad, no. I ended a man's life, Bear said quietly. That's on me. But Ray attacked you. Bear's gaze softened. And I attacked back. He wouldn't gamble on a trial dragging Paddy's name through mud. He wouldn't risk Dylan being called to testify. He'd take the fall. Moira's unseen danger. In prison, Moira sensed a shift. Her solicitor seemed cautious now. They're questioning the consistency of Bear's statement, he admitted. Because of Kane? She asked softly. He didn't answer. But she knew. Kane's protectiveness had always been fierce. Sometimes reckless. If his involvement cast doubt, her chance at freedom could slip further away. The village divides. Whispers filled the woolpack. Some believed Bear was a hero who'd defended his family. Others feared the full truth hadn't surfaced. And Kane's name hovered over every conversation. Mandy Dingle slammed her glass down one evening. Bear did what any father would, she insisted. And Moira's innocent. But even she couldn't ignore the complications. One careless phrase in an interrogation room had reframed everything. Consequences. In the final scene of the day, Walsh stood reviewing case files. Photos of Ray. Photos of the farm. Photos of Moira. And a fresh file labeled Dingle, Kane. She tapped a pen thoughtfully. Bear might have confessed. But the story didn't sit neatly. and Kane's involvement suggested threads still unpulled. A fragile hope. That night, Kane lay awake beside an empty pillow. He thought of Moira's smile, of Bear's sacrifice, of Paddy's devastation, and of his own secret illness eating away at him. He'd tried to fix one disaster. Instead, he'd sparked another. Somewhere in the village, Bear stared at the ceiling of his cell, preparing to accept a fate he believed he deserved. And in prison, Moira whispered to herself. Soon, unaware that a single slip of the tongue might have sealed her fate. In Emmerdale, loyalty ran deep. But so did consequences. And the truth, however well-intentioned, had a habit of surfacing in ways no one could control.